This is William D. Earls, architect and author of The Harvard Five in New Canaan, welcoming you to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Sometimes the controversy, particularly about a huge museum or government project, starts way before it opens, or even before a mayor or a governor, a prime minister, or, God forbid, even a Kardashian moves the first shovel of dirt. Today, we welcome Susanna Sirefman, founder and president of Dovetail Design Strategist, an architect selection firm specializing in design competitions. Also with us, not by coincidence, Robby Johnston from Raleigh Architecture, a North Carolina firm that's thinking about entering national design competitions. And now your host, the guy who used to think that the materiality of the urban fabric meant buying curtains in the Bronx, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Yes, I can get you a deal.
Sounds like a baseball game.
Inside baseball.
Oh, I get it.
You know the phrase? It means a conversation that gets too insiderish, too detailed, too jargony, so much that unless you're a devoted fan of, say, baseball, you're going to get confused, bored, or completely tune out. Like our urban fabric bit earlier.
Yes, right.
So I used to think architectural competitions were inside baseball until, thanks to the glory of Google.
Google, yes!
Tom really likes Google. I discovered design competitions are a thing, a big thing, with millions at stake, sometimes a billion or two. The whole process of architect selection for large and important projects is a huge game of chess, sometimes mixed martial arts. Most public interest projects in the U.S. are chosen by a committee that reviews architects' past work. It's like a job interview where you talk about your resume. The committee picks the firm they like best based on their portfolio. However, there's a whole world, the major leagues of inside baseball, that involves design competitions. Clients post what they want, and architects, sometimes hundreds or even a few thousand architects, have their staff and a terrazzo of interns.
Terrazzo, that's our new collective noun.
Submit ideas in hopes of winning a lucrative commission. Entering a competition is a time-consuming task generating high-detail photos and renderings that while the winner may or may not get a huge commission, there are no promises, and typically no compensation for the time spent. The carrot at the end of the process is what propels firms, small and large, to put in the time and expense towards what could be a career-defining iconic building with an 8 or 9-figure budget. For those of you doing the math, that's like 50 million or 100 million. Lots of zeros. What's the future of competition? And can small firms like Raleigh Architecture, or RACO, realistically compete against megastar firms like Bjarke Ingels, Norman Foster, and Frank Gehry? U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by modernist realtor Angela Roll and Nichiha.com/US Modernist.
Durability, designed to last for years to come, bringing you peace and tranquility. You feel relaxed, knowing your house can easily achieve any exterior look and any color. Wood, concrete. Your house loves feeling this good, and you love feeling this good. Nichiha, Nichiha. Nichiha, Nichiha. Say it with me. Nichiha. Advanced engineering. Nichiha, Nichiha. Durability, textures, finishes, and colors. Visit Nichiha.com/US Modernist. Nichiha, Nichiha, Nichiha. That's
There's a movie you've not seen. I almost guarantee it. That's because, like most architecture documentaries, it never made it to theaters. You'd have to have gone to an architectural film festival to see it. I don't think it's even available on DVD or on streaming. The movie is called The Competition. It was released in 2013, and it features how some of the best architects in the world, like Jean Nouvel, Frank Gehry, Norman Foster, and Zaha Hadid, struggle to beat each other to win the commission for a new National Museum of Art in Andorra.
George?
Yes?
Where's Andorra?
Thanks for asking, Tom. Andorra is a tiny country in the mountains between France and Spain that wanted to recreate the success of Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. And as a unique requirement of this competition, it was mandatory for the firms to allow film crews to document the creative and submission process. This was the first architecture competition to be documented part thriller, part fanboy and fangirl fantasy insider baseball.
Insider baseball!
Woo! Later on, we'll share how things worked out for Andorra and those architects.
Sorry.
The game is still going on.
Another base hit. Yep.
7th inning stretch. Our guest, Susanna Sirefman, is the founder and president of Dovetail Design Strategist, the leading independent architect selection firm in the United States. Trained at the Architectural Association in London, she's authored 5 books and is a regular contributor to the Wall Street Journal. One of those books is called Modern Shoestring, about how to build an affordable modern house. Susanna has taught at the Parsons School of Design in the City College of New York, and one of her specialties is advising big-budget, dreamy clients on which architects to pick for their big-budget, dreamy projects. We're talking about international museums, libraries, and cultural touchstones like the Orlando Pulse nightclub, which is now reinventing itself as a museum in the wake of the murders in 2016.
Really?
The firm handles traditional selection, receiving proposals and determining finalists, and also advises and runs juries for national and international competitions for clients such as Johns Hopkins, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the New York Public Library, and the Smithsonian Design Museum. Welcome, Susanna.
Hi.
Hi. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
With us in the studio, Robby Johnston is with one of the hottest modern architecture firms in North Carolina. Raleigh Architecture Company, or RACO, has reshaped downtown Raleigh residential living with its cool house designs and their largest project to date, the Fairweather condos, which are almost sold out. In an ocean of very nice, very functional, very marketable, but kind of blah apartments and condos, RACO and their clients have put the D in design for one of the city's most beautiful buildings inside and out. Welcome, Robby.
Good to be here with all of you. Thank you.
So, Robby, before we get started, Raleigh Architecture is the go-to architect for the band known as the Avett Brothers, which you've done several projects. How did that come about?
Good fortune of geography. Good fortune to myself, anyway. I was lucky enough to grow up in close proximity to the Avett brothers, to Scott and Seth Avett. Our paths overlapped several times throughout childhood. Competitive soccer, also some academic camps through high school, art camps specifically. Seth and I both attended a camp at Wingate College, spec camp, I think it was, in the summer of 1996 or 7.
Where is Wingate College?
Wingate College is just sort of southeast of Charlotte.
Okay.
The Avetts started playing out in Charlotte while I was attending the university there. And as luck would have it, our, not a roommate, but a next door neighbor one evening was leaving her apartment and said she was going to see the Avett Brothers perform a live bluegrass set at the Wine Vault in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we decided, if that's who we think it is, we should go along. And the relationship was rekindled at that time. We became some of their most loyal fans in their early days. I've probably been to, 75 Avett Brothers show at this point in time. They were kind enough to play at our wedding.
Oh, wow.
Which was a huge, huge highlight of the evening, of course. My relationship with Scott has really flourished over the years. He is certainly a creative force, be it music, writing, his painting, which he currently has a show at the North Carolina Museum of Art. But all in all, he's an advocate for the arts, and recognizing each other as creative individuals, we've found opportunities to work together, mostly in the form of creating spaces for he and his family, which transitioned into an opportunity to design and build a house here in Raleigh for Joe Kwan and his wife, Emily Meineke.
Now, also in Raleigh, you were building the Fairweather condos, which is arguably one of the city's best-looking buildings. How did you get your clients to make design such a priority?
Luckily, they had done that in advance of our involvement. So much like a design competition, I believe, they had prioritized the importance of design with this building type. Stats show that no one's built a condo building ground up in downtown Raleigh in the last decade. So being a critical part of the fabric and being a critical part of Raleigh's path forward. And I think showing a thoughtful, sensitive, creative solution to a denser housing option. The development team consists of all forward thinkers, be it financial or just having a design background. So from the beginning, it was important to them to hire a firm that was thinking congruently with them on the importance of that structure.
Now, they just picked you, right? There was not a competition?
Not a competition. There was an interviewing process. So I think they identified 3 firms. They interviewed all 3 firms. And without actually producing any design work or, a proposal at all in any way, short of a loose discussion regarding fees and schedule, they made the selection. Frank Thompson, a huge arts advocate here in Raleigh, North Carolina, is one of the he's the creative guru on the team, if you will. And it was actually really important to him that no one worked for free for this project. So shortly after they made the decision to proceed with Raleigh Architecture Company, we entered into a short form agreement to where I think for a modest fee, we quickly investigated the feasibility and made what would equate to sort of a competition proposal for the project.
Okay.
Had to get investors excited as early as possible.
Yeah,
So
get people on board.
it was a big critical step.
Susanna, you have been working with competitions a long time, and I know that you studied this as well. What is the history of competitions? I mean, how far back did they go for architectural projects?
Oh, well, competitions go back centuries, and legend has it that the first architecture competition was in ancient Greece for a war memorial on the Acropolis site in Athens, and I think it was 448 BCE. And there's been, over time, some really interesting and important architecture competitions. For instance, Brunelleschi's dome in Florence at the Santa Maria del Fiore, they had a competition in the mid-1400s. Brunelleschi obviously won, and I have no idea if it's true or not, but there's a legend that part of the competition was that the winning architect or engineer had to be able to balance an egg on a flat piece of marble, and only Brunelleschi could do that.
Okay.
Has that requirement resurfaced in any subsequent?
Dovetail has not asked for that requirement recently.
Now, you were an associate professor of architecture at the City College of New York. How did you get from there to advising clients and administering competitions?
Well, I'm actually trained as an architect, and I think it all started for me while I was studying at the Architectural Association in London, England, in the mid-1990s. At that time, I was really lucky to be commissioned to write a book on contemporary architecture in Chicago, and I spent my summer break before my final year of architecture school just walking and riding the L all around the city of Chicago, looking for the best examples of new, innovative architecture that I could find. I think I covered close to 228 square miles, and I met with almost every single architect in the book. And the book had 100 buildings, all built within the last decade. And then the following year, once I had completed my degree, I was commissioned by the same publishers to write a book on contemporary architecture in New York City following the same format. It was 100 buildings, all built within the last 10 years. So there, I spent another 4 months walking all over New York City's 5 boroughs and met with almost all the architects featured in my book. And at that time, that's when I started to teach at the university level. And I did practice architecture with a colleague of mine from the Architectural Association and was writing for all the trade magazines and traveling, seeing projects and meeting architects from all over the world. And people started asking me constantly, what architects should they use for their projects? And I realized you can't just make a recommendation. Selecting an architect is not like a doctor referral or a restaurant recommendation, but it has to be a process.
Yeah, try the veal.
So I founded Dovetail to fill the gap. People really needed clarity, guidance in selecting the right architecture firm for the right project. And this really stems from my real belief that the right architect for the right project will make for a much better, smoother project and add years to the life of a building and organization, because design excellence really matters. And this is, I think Dovetail is really all about promoting design excellence.
Excluding Bilbao, which we'll get to shortly, what are some of the most famous buildings in the last 50 years that originated in a competition?
I guess the Pompidou comes to mind.
In Paris?
In Paris, yeah. That was an open design competition. I don't know. Let me think on that. What else comes to mind?
Do you remember any, Robby, that you know of?
Do you have any idea how many entries there were for the Pompidou?
I don't know for the Pompidou.
Tell me more about these famous buildings that have been part of a competition in the last 50 years.
World Trade Center.
Yeah, the new World Trade Center. Sure.
Large,
well,
controversial.
Yeah, the memorial downtown.
The memorial.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
The memorial downtown. Parc de la Villette in Paris also. Sydney Opera House, but that's a while ago. Bibliothèque de France in Paris. That was in 1997. Oh, another big one was the Oslo Opera House in Norway, designed by the firm Snøhetta, that really put the firm on the map. The High Line was a design competition.
Right,
run by
sure.
The
big
City
competition
of New
for that.
Yeah.
And then you have Maya Lin winning the Vietnam Memorial Competition 30 years ago?
That's right. That was in the 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah, quite a while back.
And that was quite a controversial project at the time. It seems funny to us now because it really did set the bar for design excellence for memorials, but the fact that it was so abstract really threw people off.
Yeah, it created a new category, really, for memorials.
Completely, yeah.
I think later people who were uncomfortable with it built something out of brass towards the back, some soldiers.
Yes, there's a realistic sculpture of some soldiers, yeah, but I think that seems to happen frequently with memorials, that there's always a faction who wants to see something that's more realistic than the abstract, but that's a very powerful memorial.
I think everyone was able to understand it. When it was a conceptual idea, it was very difficult, I think, for people to grasp at. I think once they were able to see their own reflection in the names of someone that they loved and lost, they started to understand what this sort of wound in the earth really stood for.
I think the project got caught up in the culture wars of that time. There was a lot of different opinions as to what was appropriate and what wasn't.
Still going on.
Yeah.
So walk us through what happens in a competition. Let's say you've got a small country as a client. Let's go with the Bahamas. The Bahamas wants a new National Museum of Art. They come to you. How does the process start?
Well, there's different kinds of competitions. There's what's called an open international design competition, where it is open, obviously, geographically, and you decide the rules as to, does it need to be a licensed architect? Does it need to be a student? Does it, the constituency, your market, who you're actually sending this competition out to, can either be open, it can be invited. That's when there's a list in advance, and the criteria has already been decided. Once the decision has been made, whether it's open or invited, there's also decisions as to how many stages is it. Is it one stage? Is it two stage? Will there be different levels of selection? Will there be just going right from the original submission then to a winner? Will there be a first stage and a semifinalist, and then they'll have to do more work, and then there will be a finalist, and that sort of thing? A jury also has to be put together, and it's very, very important who the decision makers are. And then, once all of that has been put together, a design brief has to be written. So typically, Dovetail will work with clients to understand exactly what the project program is, what needs to be done, what the scope of services will be, and then a decision as to what are the best materials to look at to make that decision. What's the question that you're going to ask? So there's some upfront work in organizing a design competition. Once the design brief has been written, that is either made available to an open constituency or sent to invited architects, depending on the kind of design competition it is. And then submissions come in, and then the jury meets. I like as much client and architect interaction as possible. So we frequently will, at some stage, maybe not the first round, but the second round, request that architects come to an in-person interview. which is partly also why one has to compensate, so that hopefully, at the very minimum, their travel costs are covered. And then my clients can actually meet them in person, and they make a presentation.
What's the total timeline on the typical process for this?
It varies greatly from project to project. A typical competition can be anywhere from the minute that the release of the design brief to the end, 6 months to 8 months, occasionally slightly longer.
The typical request for qualifications, is there usually a request for mission statement, project approach, based on what you're sharing up front about the project?
It all depends. Sometimes yes and sometimes no. I mean, that's more sort of request for proposal, which is kind of that intermediary. It's not only about qualifications, but it's also about, what's your sort of thinking about this project? Not concept design, but how would you begin to work at this project?
How many submissions are there typically in a competition?
That also varies greatly. It can be, if it's and I assume you're talking about an open design competition.
Yeah.
Typically, anywhere from 50 to 200 to 300. I think those are nice numbers. And I know that there's been a couple of design competitions where they've gotten ridiculous numbers, and I'm not convinced that everybody, certainly not for us, but not sure everything gets looked at when you start to talk about thousands of submissions.
I think I remember the World Trade Center Memorial was 8,000?
They got something like 5,000, but 5, I think that was a very, and I'm sure everything was looked at for that, but that was a very unique design competition, I think. It was a unique problem, I should say. We try very hard to target our audience and be very specific. It's a business decision on the part of architects, and we're really not interested in wasting anyone's time. So we try and make it as specific as possible so that firms can really determine themselves if it's a good fit for them.
Let's go back to the movie mentioned earlier, The Competition, where Jean Nouvel, Frank Gehry, and Zaha Hadid struggle to win the commission for the National Museum of Art in Andorra. In the movie, you see Frank and Jean, but Zaha had the good sense never to appear on camera, leaving her architects and interns to deal with the camera crew. This was the first documentary of a competition, and you'd hope there was a happy ending, where one of these firms wins and the lovely country of Andorra starts building its museum. But that doesn't happen. The museum still hasn't been built. Does that happen frequently with competitions, that they just fizzle out?
Not with the Dovetail Design Competition. We now have over $1 billion worth of projects that are either built or in construction. I don't like to take on projects if it's not clear to me that A, they have the funding for them, and B, that there's the will to make them happen. So we have an incredible track record.
Do we know if the Andorra Museum, they ran out of money, or they...
No, we don't. They just decided not to do it.
Oh.
They ended up with a film, but no museum.
I believe it. I've seen the film, and I believe at the end of the film it says that the government changed. But what was not clear to me was why they hadn't made a decision as to a winner immediately following the presentations.
Now, I understand that you've met a lot of these architects that I've mentioned, like Jean Nouvel and Frank Gehry. Mm-hmm. So does Jean Nouvel know that he looks like Dr. Evil from the Austin Powers movies? Has anyone told him?
You don't remember asking him that specifically, huh?
Well, while George and Susanna book a flight to Paris to confront Jean Nouvel, let's go to the continuing made-up adventures of modernist realtor Angela Roll. In an adventure we are largely making up, modernist realtor Angela Roll dated Harry Potter at age 17, as she attended Le Corbusier High School just down the road from Hogwarts, of course. The esteemed schools never played each other in Quidditch, but their proms were to die for.
Legendary.
Particularly the year they did Stairway to Heaven. Although ridiculed by other architecture students for dating a magician, she learned how to conjure up the cigar-smoking, slightly tipsy ghost of Mies van der Rohe, and she aced all the exams. Now, Angela Roll specializes in modernist houses and uses her architecture training, which is a real thing, to advise buyers and sellers on the best strategies for preserving the architecture they love and which dress to wear to a Hogwarts prom. Angela Roll is your special agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com, that's ROEHL, or 919-995-0550.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, let's talk about the Guggenheim. one of the world's most famous museums. No, not the one by Frank Lloyd Wright in New York, but the other one by the other Frank Gehry, in Bilbao, Spain. Susanna, you've written a lot about this project. Tell us about the significance of the building and how it changed the game for both cities and competitions.
Well, I think that the Guggenheim Bilbao was one of the very first cultural buildings that was used for economic development. And the idea behind placing it where they did in the city of Bilbao was to generate tourism and interest in the area. And it is a spectacular building. And the result is there's now a term, it's called the Bilbao effect. And many other cities and municipalities have tried to recreate the same thing by putting in either museum or theater, but with really fabulous architecture that people come just to see the building.
And describe the building for us. Come on, describe a little Gehry. See if you can.
Well, I think it's a very sensuous building. I think what was very important to Gehry was not only the feeling inside the building, but actually how you approach the building and how it's such an extraordinarily interesting building with all its curves and the material. I think it was one of the first buildings out of titanium, which now is used regularly. You know, you get this sense of anticipation. You know, what's it going to be like inside? It's an exciting building to approach and to look at. And it also sits very beautifully in its site. It has a lot to do with the context.
You wrote about the Bilbao Guggenheim as an example of voluptuous architecture. What is that? And is it a good thing, or do we need to call HR?
I think at the time that I wrote that, which was actually quite some time ago, I was really... I think it is voluptuous. I think it's sensuous. I think there's something pleasurable about the building. And it's not so much even about the curves of the building. I think it's just about the materiality, the sculptural quality. It's a very beautiful building.
When architects come up to you at conferences and meetings that you go to, which is the bigger crowd? Those that scorn competitions and think they're unfair, or those that want to get the inside scoop on how to win them?
I think those that want to get the there is no inside scoop, though. I mean, I think that's another sort of misperception.
Okay.
A dovetail design competition we try and be as equitable and as fair as possible. You know, it really is very, very important to us that and it's almost fairer than it's not the Wild West. We actually have a process, and it's a very clear process that is laid out from the get-go, and everybody knows what's expected of them.
Well, there are obviously a lot of other competitions besides yours that don't necessarily hold to those standards and are giving the industry a little bit of a knock.
I suppose. As I said, I think it's a business decision on the part of architects, you know, whether or not it makes sense for them to enter. I think even if architects don't win a particular very public open design competition, it serves many other purposes. It gets their name out there. They throw their hat in the ring. I mean, using the example of the open international design competition that Dovetail just ran for the Wampulse Foundation, in fact, it was just won by a French firm named Coldefy, who nobody knew. So in a way, it was, you know, fantastic for them. It's put them on the map. It was really, you know, a great opportunity for them to get a cultural project of this scale by entering the competition. So I think the competitions serve a wonderful purpose. The Pompidou, too. Renzo Piano, nobody knew who he was. And they won the competition and have had an incredible career since then. So I think they really definitely serve an important place. I think one has to be careful. All competitions are not created equal, clearly. And I think you have to be careful about which design competitions you're talking about.
What are the rookie mistakes that firms make when they enter competitions?
I think the biggest piece of advice I can give is to read the design brief incredibly carefully and really try and understand what the client is thinking about and what the client's needs are, which is true for a project that's not a design competition. It's not about sharing your sort of out there vision of how you imagine the world. It's really understanding what does the client really need? Not so much what they want, but, you know, what does this project need and what added value does your vision and your experience and your way of thinking have?
Well, don't most architects do that to some level? I mean, what I was wondering is, do you see any things that are just kind of clear rookie errors, like, you're going out on the baseball field and you swing the bat the wrong way? Do some firms just make some mistakes that are easily corrected?
Well, I mean, there's pragmatic things like, it's shocking how many typos and lack of pagination.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Which seem like really, really simple, stupid things. But when you've got a committee of decision makers all trying to flip to page 12 and they can't find page 12, it makes a difference.
Yeah, it's all about design.
It's true. It's about details.
Yeah, thorough. The ability to be thorough.
Yeah, definitely.
How does your firm handle deadline extensions when the final date?
There are none.
There are none.
The deadline is a deadline. I think we view any selection process, be it an open or an invited design competition, an RFQ, an RFP, an interview, every step of the way it's part of the selection process, which is also, I think, a piece of useful advice that, every step of the way treat it as seriously as every other. And we have never once allowed a deadline extension. I don't think it's fair to anybody.
Well, that's great, because it seems to be a lot of problems when you have deadline extensions, especially when the work is available to everyone to see and then people start copying. It's a little bit like cheating, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're known in the industry by both our clients and our architects that we follow international protocol and we follow it to the T.
And from everything you said so far, you're running a equitable process, and you've thought very hard from the beginning about how much time one actually needs to carefully consider the submission and make the proposal, which I think has been a challenge as a young company for us, is meeting deadlines, not looking at competitions as our typical means of business development, taking time away from everything that we're doing as a small office that's billable to pull that together. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do. There's a local competition we're working on right now. It's more of a RFP/Q, and it's 9 business days from start to finish.
That's tough. Yeah, that's tough. But I do think that and I do advise young offices that looking at it as part of almost your marketing expense, and you have a team in place, and that's what they do. And at some point, you can have templates.
That's right.
For how you submit, and if you get in a rhythm, there are multiple firms who have made their name by entering international design competitions, whether run by Dovetail or not.
Right.
And I think there's huge value even in the office, but by everyone looking at interesting problems. Typically, dovetail design competitions are really interesting questions, whether it be for a memorial or a library or a school. And there's definitely value for your entire staff to be thinking about these issues in conjunction with your bread and butter other work.
Sure. And I think it's unfair. I'm not pinning this on competitions. Let's be honest, anything that we pursue that's new requires a lot of additional effort, time, thinking. That's taking away from maybe our day-to-day billable work, whether we're going after a competition project or a private project, or we're just interviewing against 3 other firms. We're going to probably have anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks invested that we'll never see a penny for to prove that we're the right decision for that project.
Susanna, how do architects find out about design competitions? Like, how do they find out about yours?
So if it's an open design competition, typically we make sure that we advertise on all of the digital media. So DZine, Bustler, Architecture Daily, and ours have always somehow managed to go completely viral and get incredible coverage, which is what we want. So there are a number of these various different design digital venues that advertise all of these architects' newspaper. There's a lot of them.
There's also a website I found called designcompetition.com that lists them from all over the world.
Every project has a winner. It represents the consensus decision from a jury. How do you put together juries for all of these competitions?
That's an excellent question. I think the decision makers, the jury group, should always include the major stakeholders. So it has to be people who have a direct interest in the project. It has to be those who can help make it happen. If it's the civic authorities need to be included, absolutely. There should be some outside architectural expertise, because very frequently the stakeholders are not architects.
Right.
But I do think that it's very, very important to have the stakeholders involved. And we always publish for an open design competition and even when we run invited, I'm very, very clear. We're very clear about who is going to be at the table. So you know who you're presenting to, you know who's thinking about this. And that's actually another piece of advice to a young firm, is that you should know who you're talking to.
Yeah. Who's the audience?
Know who your audience is. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, it's amazing how many times in all kinds of competitions, not just design ones, how infrequently people actually research the jury.
That's the first thing we look for. And I mean, we're doing more awards programs than we're doing competitions at this point in time, but it is the very first thing we try to identify.
I think that's super smart.
Tell us about your scaffolding project. I understand this was a competition that you ran, and you were also the client. I mean, this was your thing, right?
I was not the client. I ran this for the city of New York.
Okay.
And in fact, it was the Bloomberg administration's idea, not mine, that they were very, very forward-looking in that they wanted the pedestrian experience in the city to be better than it currently was. And I think we have over 6,000 miles worth of scaffolding up because we have something here called Local Law 11 that means that if you have a problem with your facade, until it's fixed, you actually have to put scaffolding up. And I'm sure you're familiar with typical New York scaffolding. It's held together by blue tape, and it just looks like crap. And if you get your clothes snagged on it, and it's also very low and dark. So they actually came to Dovetail and said, we'd like to do something about this. So we ran a design competition for them, and it's popping up everywhere now. It took a while, but it was a fantastic design competition, won by a young graduate student at University of Pennsylvania who had teamed up with a group of architects and engineers here. And it's now, I think it's at over 40 sites now. And I call that voluptuous architecture. It's beautiful.
So they've built 40 installations of the scaffolding?
I think it's about, I don't know the exact number, but I think it's about that.
Are there any that we can visit in New York that you know of?
Sure. There's one at 85th and 3rd.
Aren't they everywhere?
But not the new ones, the new ones.
Yeah, the new ones. I could send you a list. Do you want me to go through where they are now? Or
just mention a couple for us.
Okay. There's one on Madison Avenue and 65th Street. There's one on 85th and 3rd. There's another one, I think it's Madison and 86th or 85th. They're downtown as well. There's a number dotted all over. And they also, funnily enough, before they went up here, were up in Toronto at Ryerson University. Someone put them up. And I think there's talk of having the design be put up in London and in Boston.
Can you describe for us, because this is audio, what the difference is between these new scaffoldings and the old ugly ones we're used to?
Well, absolutely. So, first of all, there's the color. The old ones were just thin steel pipes and some wood and painted wood boards. These are beautiful white steel cylinders. They have no cross bracing. They're held up they were inspired by the design of an umbrella. So they're held up by umbrella-like, it feels like arches. And they're much higher. They're lit by LED lights that are circular and beautiful. Some of them are painted other colors than white. There's one right on Fifth Avenue in front of Bergdorf's. It's actually in front of Louis Vuitton across the street from Bergdorf's that's painted multiple colors. It's gorgeous.
What's the likelihood that people will love these so much that they just want to leave them up?
People joke about that. People definitely joke about it. It's run by a company now. Venture capitalist invested in it, which made it all possible.
Mark Cuban. There you go.
I don't believe it was Mark Cuban, but invested in it, and it's now a company, and they've done a marvelous job of getting it up all over the city. And
what's the student's role, the creator's role in all of this at this point in time?
They were very involved up until recently, but I think now that the venture capitalist, I don't know all the details, but I think the venture capitalist actually runs this company.
The student's working at Arby's in Schenectady.
I hope not. I hope there's a percentage in the deal.
I do too. Susanna, you've been involved in the design competition for the National Pulse Memorial and Museum in Orlando. What was your role in that, and who's won?
Well, as we were just talking about, the firm Col de Fee, the French firm, won. So I was approached by the One Pulse Foundation, which is a foundation formed by Barbara Poma, who was the owner of the Pulse nightclub. that they wanted to build both a memorial and a museum for the project. And Dovetail's role was to create and execute the design competition. Because of the sort of inclusive nature of One Pulse Foundation, it made absolute sense to run an open design competition. And we framed it so that we were looking for architect-led design teams. So we wrote a design brief and sent it out, and we were requesting architecture firms to team up with urban designers, landscape designers, exhibition designers. Had a fantastic result. We got 68 submissions from all over the world. The interest in the project and just the sympathy people had for the horrific, tragic event was really very, very moving. Out of the 68, 6 teams, I should say, 6 architect-led teams were shortlisted. And then they received the design brief, and there was a $50,000 honorarium at the end of the design competition, and they were asked to spend 3.5 months thinking about the problem, and there was a very clear set of drawings. There was one model that was actually 2 models, I correct myself, a model of the memorial and a model of the site, requested at very specific scales. We were very clear about what the submissions were. All the architects came in and actually met with Barbara Poma, and they met with a victim's family member and a survivor, and they toured the site so that they would have a really clear understanding of what the project was all about. We held a concept design viewing for the victims' families, for the survivors, for the first responders, who commented on the designs, and all the comments were seen by the jury. The jury met and selected a winner, and the winning team was led by this French firm, Col de Fille, from Paris and Lille, France.
And when is that building going to be constructed?
I think that the goal is to have something completed by 2022. I'm not completely sure, and I don't want to hold them to anything, but the competition has been completed. They received a lot of publicity. It's a spectacular design, and it will go through some more iterations because they want as much possible community input. So the architect team will now work with the community and the stakeholders, of which there are many, on refining the design.
Looking ahead to 2020, are there any competitions coming up you can tell us about?
No, all top secret.
Okay. All right. Well, we don't want to have to be shot or anything.
Well, we know where to look now.
Susanna, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really been a pleasure to have you on. I'm really looking forward.
It's been fun. You've had me giggling.
Well, that's what we want. That's a desired result. And Robby, thanks for coming in and joining us.
It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special real estate agent for modernist houses, and by Nichiha.com/US Modernist.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive modernist archives to hear past shows, discover 7,000 mid-century houses, and access 2.7 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. Contact George at usmodernist.org or on Instagram at mr.modernism. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. You'll never get to meet guest researcher Cindy Stratton.
Not her real name.
As she's just moved to an even more secret underground hideaway.
Don't tell anyone.
U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. George and I'll be back soon with another breathlessly cinematic, woefully underfunded edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.